Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me just say that we get it. Personal development can be hard, but you don't have to do it alone. Project Endure has been on a mission to create a supportive and inspiring community of people, all striving to be better together. Head down to the link in the show notes and join the Hard Things Club so that we can do hard things together. And if you're already a member, invite a friend and spread the love. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 185. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and down in Texas, we have a very, very special guest, Rob Escalante. Rob, how are you?
Dude, I'm great. Thank you for having me on. I'm pumped for this.
It is a pleasure. It's long overdue, and I'm equally pumped. And before we get into it, I was joking that I wasn't sure how I was going to introduce you, but your given first name isn't actually Rob. And so I'm gonna let you introduce yourself. And why don't you go with your full given name?
Yeah. I'll give you my government name is kind of how I always say it, right? So I'm Yori Robert Escalante. Obviously, I don't go by Yori. I think that probably out of the hundreds of people that know me, less than 5% know that that's actually my real name, right? Like it's very kept secret. It's a good party trick for me because people always say, "Oh, is your first name Robert?" I'm like, "No," and guess what? I'm gonna make you guess, and you're never gonna get it, right? So I always get a drink or two out of people because I'll bet you a drink you can't, say what my first name is, and then I pull that out as Yori, and they're like, "What the hell?" But yeah, let me introduce myself. So my name's Rob. Obviously, I kind of already said that. I am both a PhD student in the field of motor neuroscience and a strength coach. And I've been friends with Joe since what, 2021, 2022 is when we met, back at the BPN athlete weekend that we had in Austin. And it was just kind of a spur of the moment thing. I got lumped into a group chat of a bunch of people that were staying there. They were like, "Hey, we got this place in Austin." I was like, "Cool. I'll throw down $100 to get a free bed or to get a bed." And, me and Joe really, really connected over that weekend, which was really cool. But um, diving into a little bit of what I specifically do, I mentioned that I'm a PhD student in motor neuroscience. For those of you that don't know what that means, that's essentially the study of how people learn how to move, the study of movement, motor control, motor learning, kind of the theory behind all of those things. And then kind of, I say on the side, but it's funny because it's not an on the side thing. It actually makes more money than my PhD stipend does. I'm a strength coach. I'm a remote strength coach specifically within the sport of powerlifting, here in Texas, where I've got clients, across the states, and then also, now across the world.
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there, but I do want to go back to that first weekend we met. We were also bunkmates. We slept in the same room. I can't remember. Were you top bunk or bottom bunk?
I was definitely a bottom bunk guy. I don't trust myself on any top bunk nowadays.
Well, we made it through the weekend just fine, and yeah, it was from there that our friendship grew. That our relationship through social media continued to flourish, and I got to see you grow as a coach, and in other ways as well, and you got to see me grow as a coach, and in other ways as well. And where I really want to go with this before we get deep is to tie in what you're studying, right, with your PhD, with maybe some life lessons for people who have no idea what it is that you actually do and what you actually research, right? So, what is maybe one or two life lessons from the world of motor learning that could translate to somebody listening who has no interest in motor learning?
Yeah, dude, that's a really, really great question. And I'm gonna take this in two separate paths here. One of them is going to be a life lesson that I learned specifically about kind of the work it takes to get to this point, right? As of recently, I've been admitted into candidacy. For those that don't know, that means that I've passed my comprehensive exams, which is a huge deal, as well as my dissertation proposal, which is another big deal. Um, and throughout that process, if I try and think back on anything that would just recur in my mind over and over again through this process, it's the word grit.
Mm.
And I think the word grit is a perfect example of for those of you that have gone through graduate school. I know, Joe, you've gone through physical therapy school. You understand the meaning of that word grit when you're in clinicals and you're waking up, you're the bottom of the barrel like guy in these clinics, and you're having to just put yourself forward, put the smile on your face for days that you don't want to put that smile on your face because your end goal is helping other people, right? And while I'm not, you know, working personally with individuals within the lab on a very large basis like a clinician would, I still think that that word of grit, that word of just forever being tenacious towards a goal is extremely, extremely important to learn because there are days throughout this process where, I didn't want to go into the lab. I didn't want to wake up at 4 a.m. to study for my comprehensive exam so then I could, go in and teach and then actually go and do all my coaching stuff after I'm done, right? And so I think that's the perfect way to describe it. Something that I always love to touch on is actually something that my mom sent me. It's on a t-shirt that we sell here at Escalate, and it's this idea of lighting your own tunnel, right? And I think that the word grit and lighting your own tunnel kind of come together. And it was this quote that she sent me when I was really going through a tough time, both starting graduate school and, attempting to kind of level up my life and buying a house, and stuff just wasn't, the puzzle pieces weren't fitting together the way that I thought they would, right? And I was really down on myself because I hold myself to a higher standard than I think a lot of people do. I think a lot of business owners, probably a bunch of people listening to this podcast, do that as well. And she sent me this quote, and it was the definition of grit, or a definition of grit, and it was talking about everything that I talked about previously, where it's perseverance, it's this tenacity, it's this determination towards a specific goal. And at the end, it just had this line that rings true to myself. It still gives me goosebumps when I'm talking about it. But it's this line at the end that just says, and if you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, light that fucker up yourself. And I mean, if you're talking about getting fired up towards a goal, dude, I get emotional when I talk about this because it's just so important, because you're not always going to have that kind of like support system. You're not always going to have that, you know, significant other or family there with you personally to help you through those times. But if you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, you have to have the ability to light it yourself. You have to have the ability to keep pushing through. And so that's kind of the more mentality focused side of what I've learned through my motor learning, motor control. I know that's not specifically like motor learning or motor control based, but I think that grit and lighting your own tunnel is a lesson that a lot of people can learn from. Now, the second one is a little bit more focused on learning itself. And it's this idea, and this is what I tell a lot of my clients, this is what I tell a lot of my students. I love talking about this. It's this idea that learning is a superpower,
Mm.
right? I mean, let's think about this, Joe. Let's really dive into this, because if you can imagine right now, you don't know how to do something, right? Like, say we'll pick something. What's something, Joe, physically that you don't know how to do?
We're gonna come back to this episode in 10 years and see if I've done this, but play the
Okay,
piano. Play the piano.
play the piano. All right, Joe, how crazy is it that if you were to put in maybe 30 minutes a day, maybe even 30 minutes a week of like deliberate practice, actually sitting down and playing the piano. In a year, you could say, "Hey, I'm Joe Rinaldi and I play the piano." That's insane, right? It's like learning is this process where we don't know something, right? And then through repeated exposure, I mean, in the field of learning, we kind of talk about it in this term called plasticity. And when I talk about exposure, it always brings me back to this really funny um, experiment that kind of showed all of this plasticity or learning effects in a specific sea creature called Naplesia. It's just this blob. Like it's literally a nothing burger of a fish. It's just a blob. And they were able to, shock it a couple times, and then by the time that, it learned that it was getting shocked, it would give like a response, right? So it was learning something, right? But through repeated exposure, through you being repeatedly exposed to, playing the piano, through somebody studying for a test and being repeatedly exposed to their notes, all of a sudden they just know things. You just know things. I'm sorry, that's crazy. Like that blows my mind. Like that the power of a human being, the power of an organism to be able to do that is insane, right? And when I talk about learning being a superpower, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, you know, through you being able to practice things, being exposed to specific things, whether you're a marathon runner and, continually being exposed to harder runs, right? Progressive overload, or you're a resistance training or strength training guy and, repeatedly being exposed to heavier loads on the bar, right? Your body learns how to adapt. It learns how to move in a specific way. And that process is crazy to me. And I won't dive into all the theory of it. I know that I talked to a couple of your athletes about this a year or two ago, and I love giving this analogy of if I were to dive into the theory of it, we'd be driving a car in a tornado, and trying to get to my house, and I'd show up and my house is on fire. Right? It's just this cluster mess of garbage. But to get a little bit more back on track. Sorry, I'm rambling here. Um, learning being a superpower, it it's kind of this idea that no matter where you are in life, you can always learn to get better at that specific thing that you're having a struggle with, right? And that kind of process, aligns with the grit stuff
Mhm.
because it's gonna be hard. It's gonna be difficult, and if you can get through that, if you can do hard things, right? Uh, you're going to be able to learn that specific skill or that specific aspect in your life, and being able to do that throughout your entire life. Like I said, it's a superpower. It's crazy to me. So, end rant, TLDR, have some grit, persevere, and remember that learning is an absolute superpower. It's something that anybody anywhere can do. And the fact that you can wake up one day and just say, "Hey, I'm Joe Rinaldi and I'm gonna be a piano player," is sick. It's so cool to me.
I couldn't agree more. And, where I want to take this, I guess, is two directions of my own. One is there's a book called Grit by Angela Duckworth. And it's an awesome book. It's all about what grit is, how to harness the power of grit. And she's got this quote. She says, "Enthusiasm is common, endurance is rare." And I think grit is one of the things that fuels endurance. It allows you to continue going. It allows you to keep pushing forward every time you try to spark that light in the tunnel and it doesn't actually light. Grit is what allows you to try again until it does light. And that's what allows us to keep going. And it's a beautiful thing. On the learning side, I love the idea of learning a skill that's tangible, like playing the piano, shooting a basketball, whatever it might be. And I think for people listening, it's also important to understand that learning can happen with how we choose to see the world. Learning could be applied to our perspective, right? And the way that you choose to view your world is, in a way, a skill that can be practiced over and over and over again. And I'd be curious to get your take on that, Rob, specifically. I know it's not necessarily your specific field of study, but the ability to shape our perspective as a form of learning. What's your take on that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, dude. And I think it's a very, very important lesson that a lot of coaches or aspiring business owners need to have. Because I will tell you, first and foremost, I was a bad coach with a bad perspective very early on when I was doing this. I had this perspective of, oh, I'm doing this for my clients. I'm doing this for them. I'm writing their training. I'm giving them a service, right?
Mm.
And that can get very not I don't want to say toxic, but it can get very weird, And I was a cocky 19-year-old kid, so sue me, right? Um, but through kind of growing as a coach and growing as a business owner, especially on the business owner side of things, where you're handling and managing a team, shifting your perspective of, oh, I'm doing this to serve them, and instead flipping it around and saying, "Oh, you know, I'm doing specific things to have them kind of serve me in a way," right? It's almost this idea of like total ownership that Jocko Willink and Leif Babin talk about, where it's like, "Oh, I need to own all of these things because at the end of the day, then they'll kind of look up to me and be like, oh wow, he's actually leading." He's actually being a leader for this team. He's being a leader as a coach, taking full responsibility for that instead of saying, yeah, I gave you the service. You didn't do what you were supposed to do. That's your fault. It's like, no, okay, I gave you the service. You didn't do what you were supposed to do. How can I make sure that I can make you do what you're supposed to do? Because at the end of the day, this is my fault. You didn't execute well because I didn't inform you. You didn't execute well because I didn't allow you to learn how to execute well, right? So that's kind of my take on it. And maybe as a part two of that, being able to shift your perspective towards being able to get to do things rather than have to do things. I know we've talked about that, Joe, on our calls. It was a great talk. I forgot who did it at A&M that talked about this. I've talked about it on my podcast as well, shifting perspectives and stuff. But as soon as you uh, in these hard times, right? In these kind of troublesome times where you may have to pull out that grit, you may have to try to, light your own tunnel, stuff like that. If you can shift your perspective and kind of give this mentality of, oh no, I get to wake up at 4 a.m. I get to, be um, sore from working out. I get to manage a team of 20 clients. I get to show up at work at 9 a.m., work at maybe just a simple 9 to 5 that a lot of people would dream of having, right? Stability, a paycheck. I get to have those things instead of I have to go to work. I have to write training for these 20 clients.
Mm.
I have to wake up at 4 a.m. I think that's kind of a very important realization to have for anybody in life, whether you're a business owner, whether you're a coach, whether you're just, somebody that works a quote unquote normal job, right?
Yeah, our language shapes our world for sure.
Hmm.
And, I'll give one more example of how we can learn to change our perspective on things. And then I want to jump into a bit more of you, and I'll start with a big question. But, for people listening, I think we've all experienced as humans the days or weeks or months where things are really good for no apparent reason. We feel great, things are smooth, we seem to have good fortune, right? And we're just in that groove. We've experienced times where things are good because we did something, right? We can tie it to actions we took or effort we gave. We can also experience the flip side of both of those things, seasons where life is hard for seemingly no reason at all, and seasons where life is hard because of actions we took or effort we didn't give, right? So there are these highs, there are these lows. Sometimes we can explain it, sometimes we can't. And when I look back at my life, I've understood that there are going to be these waves through observation of my lived experience and those repeated exposures. I've understood that sometimes life's going to feel great, sometimes it's just going to feel hard. And that's part of what it means to be human. And so when it feels great, I'm going to keep my head down and keep working. And sure, I'll experience it, I'll soak it in, I'll be present when I can, but I'm going to keep moving. And when times are hard, right, I understand that's not going to last forever either. And so I'm going to try to get back to the middle, keep moving, keep working. And I feel like in a way that's been for me a learning experience of life is going to fluctuate. I get to choose to be steady in the middle and continue putting one foot in front of the other. And so, in a way, that perspective has been a learned experience for me. And part of the reason I love this podcast and conversations in general is because my hope is someone could listen to this and then say, you know what, actually, that applies to me too. And I'm going to try my best to apply that going forward. So, with that being said, Rob, we're going to dive into some hard things that you've experienced. And the first big question I want to ask you is when you look back at your life so far, what's the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle that you did not choose for yourself?
Yeah, I think that it's a double-edged sword for me because the other side of this thing shaped me into the person that I specifically am today. So, uh, again, a little bit of background on myself. I grew up in a military family, meaning my dad was a career Marine. My dad's my hero. I mean, I look up to him more than I look up to anybody else in the world. He was a career Marine. He served 30 years in the Marine Corps. He retired as a full bird colonel. He was able to, be a leader for 20 or even probably 25, almost all 30 years of that career in some facet, right? And he's absolutely shaped me into the man that I am today. I cannot thank him enough for doing that. But being a military brat, being a kid that grew up within a military household, means that you are moving all the time. You are, I mean, I moved, I think it was 7 or 8 times by the time that I got to college. And then when I did get to college, I decided, I'll transfer because I was getting tired of a specific place. I decided to make it an even 8 or an even 9. I forget at this point. And, through that process, I never got to have the regular, oh, these are the kids that I grew up with kind of relationship, right? And I always, kind of wrap it around this struggle that I have with the word community, right? I struggled for such a long time with trying to find a community because I knew at the end of the day, after these 2 years, by the time I was 6, I knew what was happening, right? I knew at the end of these 2 years when we moved back from Japan, I knew that at the end of those 2 years, gotta say goodbye to my friends again. We gotta go down to North Carolina, right? Like that's the brute truth of it. And that was something that I struggled with for a very long time, even within sports, which I think that a lot of young men attach themselves to and young women alike. Even through sports, I struggled with finding a good community because again, even though I could depend on these 10 or 8 guys, whether I was playing football or playing soccer or playing baseball, I knew that I could depend on them within a season. Who knows if I was ever going to see them again after that year or after those 2 years because either they were going to move because we all lived on base together, or I was going to move. Right? It was one of these two things, and not until I found the sport of powerlifting, and not until I really got settled here in Bryan College Station at Texas A&M University did I find a great community. And so I guess the biggest thing that I have as a struggle that I didn't necessarily get to choose was this sense of losing community, sense of never having that group of guys or that group of friends that I could truly depend on for 10 plus years as a kid. Because like I said, I was moving all the time. Now, I said that this is a double-edged sword, right? I'm going to explain the other side of that coin. That absolutely shaped me into the person that I am today. I could not be the coach, I could not be the leader, I could not be the communicator that I am without having to go through that because showing up every 2 years as the new kid makes you have such a good skill set of introducing yourself, of, you know, having a fresh slate. I mean, how many kids, how many guys do you know that every 2 years they get to move somewhere new and go, This is a fresh slate. Nobody knows me. I could kind of be whoever I want, right? And this that can
Mm,
go very dark, or it could be a great thing because you can go, I'm going to try this out. What if I do this? Oh, I I didn't really get a good response from that. Okay, next time I move out, I'm not going to do that. I'm gonna kind of learn how to be a good person, right? How to adjust to different situations. And so I definitely think that I am extremely grateful to go through that. But it was in the moment, it was very hard. It was tough. I really got attached to a lot of my friends in South Georgia. This was, I was a freshman, sophomore in high school. Really formative years of an adolescent's life. And I got really attached to a lot of my friends that after those 2 years, I mean, I haven't seen them in 15 years at this point. And yeah, that's tough. But there's a couple guys that I still reach out to that I talk to within that group that, I know now are a part of my community
mm.
because we've been able to kind of, communicate with each other a little bit more often via social media or via text. So yeah, I think that was probably the hardest thing that I had to go through that I didn't necessarily choose, but I think that it was the most important thing that I needed to go through. Because, like I said, I would not be the communicator that I am right now if that wasn't the case. I wouldn't be able to do public speaking or talk to people in the way that I do if I didn't have to introduce myself, you know, upwards of 1,000 times as a kid.
I love how you frame that through the lens of learning because that's what it is. And there are people out there listening. I'm assuming there are no 6-year-olds listening, but there are some younger people listening who might be moving frequently, who might be just in a new phase of life, and in this moment, listening to these words, they don't know anyone. There might be people who have been in the same place for a long time and haven't established a community that they feel good about. If you got to speak to someone who doesn't have that group of people, their tribe, the people that they want to grow with and learn with and do life with, but they want that, what would you say to that person who's listening?
That's a good question, and I can't. That's hard to ask because I think it's or hard to answer because it's very circumstantial, right?
Mm,
However, the first thing that popped into my mind was to stop being a stranger. And I think that this is something that as I still grow and as I still become the man that I want to be, the father that I want to be to my kids, the husband that I want to be to my wife, the leader that I want to be in my community. It's still something that I struggle with.
mm,
As much as I say that I'm an extrovert, whatever, I love my alone time. I love it. I mean, like, if I've lived alone other than, my future wife coming back for the summers that she's, doing rotations. I lived alone for the past like 3 years and I love it. I love it. However, I think that I kind of shot myself in the foot there because I wasn't interacting with people on a very frequent basis, right? And I kind of lost myself in that way. And what I say by stop being a stranger, it's simply just learning how to introduce yourself. Learning how to do small talk. Small talk's great. People shit on small talk a lot. I love small talk. Getting in the elevator with somebody and just looking at them going, "What's up, man? How's your day going?" I mean, simple as that, that could be a connection. Joe, you and I have talked about that on multiple occasions when it comes to, me trying to grow my business and get new clients. I mean, who knows that guy in the elevator or that person walking down the street or the person in front of you at the coffee shop, who knows if they're going to be somebody that's going to be important in your life until you actually reach out to them,
mhm.
right? The ceiling is so high and the floor is I'll never see them again, so who cares, right? Like that's the reality. The ceiling is this could be somebody that could change my life. And the floor is I'm not going to see them after this 3-second interaction. If that's the case, then who cares? Just do it. Just introduce yourself, talk to them. I don't know how many people that, again, like I said, I love being by myself. For those of you that know, I've been, going through this process of learning how to golf for the past year. And there's not a lot better than being by yourself on the golf course. You're having your speaker out, playing some good tunes, being able to not really take score and just having fun. But a lot of the best rounds that I've ever had in my life were with strangers. And, I've met people that I still reach out to because they were paired up with me for, the 220 tee time. Walking up, yeah, in my head, I was like, damn, dude, I really wish that I was playing, this round alone. But wow, am I grateful that I didn't at the end when I was, when we're walking off the 18th green. And so, yeah, I think that the biggest thing that I could tell people is just to quit being a stranger.
Mhm.
You know, this can get very philosophical as well with like you don't know whose life you can change and all that kind
Mhm.
of stuff. And I won't go down that path, but you don't know, like I said, if that person that you randomly come across in line or at lunch or whatever is gonna be somebody that can legitimately change your life. And the only way that you can find out is if you talk to them. And then that's gonna just increase that skill. You're gonna learn how to do it more often. You're gonna be a more charismatic person, and it's gonna help you in the long run, right? Like good people love talking to good people, and you can't become a good person to talk to unless you talk to other people. It's simple as that.
I couldn't agree more with all of that. And one of the things that I've said at the past couple Project Endure events is that you're always one person, one conversation, one experience away from a completely different life. And much like you said, the ceiling is you meet someone who is important for the rest of your life. And the floor is you never see that person again. And so the stakes really aren't that high. However, I've also been in seasons of life back in college and the beginning of grad school where uh, I knew these things, and yet I still chose isolation because it was way easier to be different and alone than to try and find those other people that saw the world the way that I wanted to see it or were doing the things that I wanted to be doing. And so I also know that there's a difference between knowing what's the good thing to do and going and doing it. And so, if anyone is listening to this right now and you feel like we're talking to you, I think this is a challenge from Rob and I to you right now to go do it, to start that conversation, to get out of your comfort zone. And it could start with reaching out to Rob after this podcast and just saying what's up if you've never met him. Same goes for me. And with that being said, Rob, I want to talk about some of the hard things that you've done on purpose because there are plenty of those. And so, when you look back at your life so far, what's the hardest thing that you've ever chosen to do on purpose, and why did you choose to do that thing?
Again, I think I keep saying this. Great question. It's a fantastic question. I think I'll take this in two different ways. One is physical, and one is mental. Because I want to kind of tie this together in a nice little bow at the end. So physically, the hardest thing that I've done, that I've chosen to do, is probably whether it be a meet prep competition or the half marathon prep that I did. And I'll talk about the half marathon prep a little bit more because it was a lot more novel to me.
Mm-hmm.
I was naive to endurance training. Obviously, it was 2022. The hybrid athlete era had just been kicking off really hard. Like as much as I don't want to say, I got caught up in the hype, and I loved it. I loved being hybrid. I loved being mediocre at both sports. And no, I'm messing. Um, but I decided in 2022, maybe it was 2023. I don't even remember at this point. I decided to run a half marathon, and it was kind of on a whim. And I trained. I continued to do powerlifting through it. Coached myself both for the marathon and for powerlifting. And the day of the marathon, or I say marathon, the day of the race, the half marathon, I was able to crush my goal. My goal was to be sub 2 hours, which I think is right around like a 9:07, 9:05 pace, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because that would mean, probably if I were to extrapolate that out for a full marathon, it'd be like 4:15, 4:10, something like that, which is pretty respectable for a first marathon, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I crushed it. I mean, I think I ran like a 1:53:50. Like I was flying. It was probably a little bit of adrenaline. I also had some friends that were running it with me. And, that was a very hard thing for me to do. Like I said, I was naive to running. I, kind of dabbled with it here and there. I did this kind of like 2 mile PR thing like a year before, and then I took like a full year off of running. And I was just focused on powerlifting. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to sign up for a half marathon. And I went through it, and I was doing the speed workouts, and I was doing the tempo runs, and I was doing the long runs and all of that. And it was hard. It was really, really hard because, like I said, I'd never done it before. It wasn't something like a powerlifting meet prep where I knew what to expect because I've done 8 of them before this, right? And so, yeah, I think physically it is that half marathon prep, just like being at the end of a 10-mile tempo run, you know, half or even more than half of those miles are at, race pace. And, you're sitting there on your front stoop, right next to me over here, in a puddle of sweat in Texas. And, just like talking to yourself, like, why am I doing this, man? Like, what is going on? But being able to kind of see how I was able to, adapt both physically, like cardiovascular system, and adapt mentally and be able to push through those, um, was really cool and really fun. And I'm super grateful for that. Now, I think mentally, it's the career that I chose. I chose to go into academia. I chose to be a researcher. And to do that, you have to have a PhD. Like, it's very hard to do research without one. No university is going to hire you. No private company is going to hire you unless you have a PhD, because that kind of it's your stamp of approval of, yeah, I know how to design research. I know how to do all of this stuff. And I mean, I hate to say it for anybody that's, aspiring to do this. It's really hard. It is extremely difficult. I mean, we're talking about. I love this figure, and maybe I'll if I can find it, I'll send it to you, Joe. So you can put it on your story or something for people that are listening to this. But when you're getting a PhD, you feel like you're doing something crazy, right? Like you're expanding the knowledge of what humans know, whether that be physiological, or if you're getting a PhD in history about the past, or psychology of how we think, or anything like that. And it can really envelop you, and you can think that, oh wow, I'm really pushing the human knowledge forward, from a world perspective. But there's this great figure where it's got like a circle, and it's got, a bunch of green, and then one little tiny, like probably a pixel of black. And it's like all the green is everything that we currently know. And then that single 0.00001% pixel is the things we don't know. And then it's within that one pixel, it zooms in, and it's like one pixel again for the things that you're working on that we don't know. So, in the grand scheme of things, the stuff that I'm doing is like 0.0000001% change, right? And that can be hard to deal with. It can be hard to have that perspective and have, because you're like, you get into this process of why am I doing this? Like, what am I doing? This is this all worth it? And in the work that I do, where I'm looking to advance rehabilitation strategies for people with neurological diseases, and teach people how to move better, kind of going into the theory of how people move better, looking at neurophysiological aspects of that at the motor unit level, at the brain level, what brain areas are active, kind of pushing it forward. I think if that helps one person, a single person, I'm good. That's all I care. That's all I care about. That's all that matters to me. And to kind of go back to the you know the actual question, what is the hardest thing that I've voluntarily told myself to do? It's to pursue that, to pursue a field. I don't know if I'm going to actually help anybody. It could, it couldn't. Who knows? Every single time that we run an experiment, is it going to work? We don't know. but it's coming back. It's the grit. It's coming back. It's doing it again to perfect it and to make it better. And where I'm going to kind of tie the bow on this is in a quote that I talk about to all of my athletes, and it's in a kind of phrase that is on the tagline of my website with Escalate, and it's this idea of strength in body, strength in mind, where if you can push yourself physically, if you can do things that are physically hard, or if you can do things that are mentally hard, then the flip of that coin just becomes so easy. I talk about, physical and mental strength being this yin and yang almost, where they're almost forever connected. You can't have one without the other. To get through something that's physically hard, you have to be mentally strong because you have to tell yourself you're not going to quit. And to get through something that's mentally hard, you have to be able to have like a stack of proof of things
Mhm.
that you've done before. And for a lot of people, that stack of proof is physical accomplishments. It's the 6 mile per minute run. It's the sub 3 hour marathon. It's the 500-pound squat. It's the 315
Mhm.
three-plate bench press. It's all of those things. And I think that, like I said, they're forever connected, and that, where there's strength in body, there has to be strength in mind. And where there's
Mhm.
strength in mind, there has to be strength in body. You can't have one without the other.
I love all of it. I agree with all of it. It brings me back to this moment in the gym when I was in high school that until this very moment, to be quite honest, I didn't link to why I get up so early today, but I do think it is linked. And in high school, during the off season from football, there were certain mornings where I would get up and go to the gym at 5 a.m. So for me in this season of life, I'm at the gym at 3:30, 3:45, 4 a.m. So 5 a.m. feels a little late, but that's where it started. And I was at the gym
First of
and
all, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. Psycho. You're a
yeah,
psycho.
yeah.
5 a.m. feels a little late. Okay.
I've come to
Psycho.
terms. I've got problems, Rob. I've got big problems. But so where I was going with this was that I was at the gym and this older man, I'm assuming he was in his 30s or 40s at the time. Again, I'm a teenager. He came up to me and he said, "Do you know why everybody in this gym right now is successful outside of this gym?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Anybody who gets up every single day and comes to the gym at 5 a.m. to work hard, in a physical sense, they can translate that to everything else that they do. And they'll be successful in their careers, their relationships, et cetera, et cetera." And I think on a subconscious level, that really stuck with me because I love the idea of separating from the pack, of being different, of being a bit extreme, of working hard, knowing that this hard work in a physical sense would translate to, my ability to work hard toward other things. And that has 100% been true in my own life. And I think anybody listening to this who's done something hard in a physical sense can attest to the fact that it does make you stronger from a mental standpoint. There's this great quote, Rob, to go back to the PhD pursuit. This is again from Angela Duckworth in her book Grit. And I think this applies to, right, you pursuing the PhD. It applies to, me being married, you about to be married. It applies to anyone out there who's committed to something that they care about. So she said, there are no shortcuts to excellence. Developing real expertise, figuring out really hard problems, it all takes time, longer than most people imagine. You've got to apply those skills and produce goods or services that are valuable to people. Grit is about working on something you care about so much that you're willing to stay loyal to it. It's doing what you love, but not just falling in love, staying in love. And I love that idea of staying in love, of finding ways to stay loyal to something that you care about, because it would be easy. And I'm sure these thoughts have crept in for you as they creep in for me from a business owner standpoint, from, an academic standpoint at times, from other standpoints. Why am I doing this? It might just be easier. It might just be better to choose another path. But for some reason or another, we stay loyal to the things that we care about. And I think that is what underpins a lot of endurance is you have to stay loyal to the process.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, again, if people didn't know, I went into college thinking that I was going to be a high school English teacher. That was my goal, right? And where my maybe my subject of knowledge, my field has changed, that process of wanting and finding a new love, finding a new way to do it that's important to me, of loving to educate others. You know, I think of myself, if I were to describe what I do, I don't think I would call myself an academic. I don't think I would call myself a researcher. I don't think I would call myself a neuroscientist. I don't think I would call myself a powerlifter or a powerlifting coach. I think I would call myself an educator because that's what I do. If I were to take everything that I do from a coaching perspective and everything that I do from an academic and research perspective, my goal is to educate others. And that's what I found out that I loved to do in high school. Now, I thought that I was going to educate others through the study of the English language, through being an English teacher, right? And I got to college and I thought to myself, wow, this sucks. What am I thinking? First of all, I don't want to read. I don't want to read all this garbage, right? Like I was in a Sherlock class my freshman year, sophomore year. I was like, what am I doing? Like what am I doing here? This is not what I want to do. And where I fell out of love with teaching English, I found a new love in teaching people how to move,
Mm,
in teaching people exercise science, in trying to teach people new things that I'm figuring out through my research, right? So to kind of, kind of give a perspective on how I've fallen more in love with what I do and how I've been able to find ways to stay in love with what I do. It's realizing that no, my title is not English teacher, it's educator. Okay,
mm.
how can I continue to be an educator?
So that brings up a topic that I love talking about, but I've talked about a lot on the podcast over time, so I'll keep it brief. But it's embracing characteristics over titles. It's embracing the fact that you're an educator, not an English teacher. You're an educator, not just someone who's pursuing a PhD. You're an educator, not just someone who coaches. The educator underpins, it's the foundation of all those other things that you do. And I think that's important because, titles, positions, these stations in life that we have, they can be taken away and they might shift, they might change over the course of our life. But at your core, you will always be an educator. And if you could know that about yourself and you can apply that to all of the other things that you'll go on and do, that becomes a really powerful frame because nobody could ever take away the fact that at your core, you're an educator. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, and I would encourage people listening, if you have titles, if you have, job descriptions that you call your own, but you don't know who you are deep down beneath that thing, figure out what it is. Rob, you said educator. I would call myself an investor or a builder, investing into people, relationships, pursuits, building a business, building relationships, communities, etc. Right? What is it that you are beneath the things that you do? And I think if you can latch on to that, nobody can ever take those things away from you. So that would be another challenge for people listening. And to keep us moving forward here, Rob, I'll ask you the second of my last two questions. So everybody on this podcast answers this question. It's a simple one. The Project Endure podcast. When you hear the word endure or endurance, what does that mean to you?
Yeah. So endurance to me is the longful pursuit of greatness. I think that's the best way for me to put it. It's and I won't say longful, I'll say lifeful
Mm,
because it's something that you do for the rest of your life. It's this lifelong pursuit of greatness. And greatness is going to be something that changes throughout your life. When you're 8 years old, greatness is you being able to beat that Mario level and hit a home run, right? That's greatness. If you were to tell your friends that you did that in a single day, they'd look at you and go, dude, that's great. Like, that's awesome. You're the epitome of greatness. As a teenager,
Mm,
greatness might be getting your first 4.0 GPA and being captain of a football team, right? People would look at that and say, that's a great kid. As a young adult, greatness is, having a strong relationship and being a family man. And, family man is in like your current immediate family, which is your mom, dad, and siblings.
mm,
Um, People would say, look at that and say, oh, that person's great. In the middle age, it's being a family man, or a mom, or whoever, a leader in your family for your wife or husband and your kids, and continuing to be a leader in the community. As an old man, an old woman, it's staying physically strong and still moving and still trying to help others. That's greatness. So
mm,
I think it's this lifelong process of trying to pursue greatness and understanding that you'll never get there because it's always going to change. It's always going to be something different. Like I said, if a 30-year-old went up to you and said, "Hey man, I beat a level in Mario and I hit a home run today," you'd go, "Cool, dude." You wouldn't go, "That's great." you know? But if an 8-year-old did that, you'd be like, dude, that's awesome. Like, you're great. You're a great kid.
mm,
So I think that's my definition of it. That's my definition of enduring things.
mm,
It's this lifelong pursuit of wanting to be great. And through that, understanding that definition of greatness is gonna change depending on where you are in life.
mm. That's such a good point. And, I think success is subjective in a lot of ways. And this is a whole another rabbit hole that we can dive into another time. But too often I see people defining what success or what great looks like based off of what other people think that they should define those things as. And I would also encourage, again, a third challenge here. If you're listening, figure out what success looks and feels like to you in this season of life, not to anyone else, but to you. And to Rob's point, it's going to shift, it's going to change. That's part of life, is that our definition of greatness is going to evolve, and we have to be willing and ready to pivot and adjust our sails so that we can continue chasing that thing that matters most to us. And so, with that being said, Rob, the last question of the podcast, which is my favorite, is really meant to give you an opportunity to speak to people who are going through a tough time, who are hurting, who are feeling stuck or lost, or just don't know where to go or what to do. And so, if somebody out there is in that season and it's just a tough one, and they're wanting some encouragement or guidance or just something from you to spark something in them, what would you say?
I think I would definitely tell them that it's okay to have those feelings. Um, you had asked me early on in this recording what the hardest thing that I went through was, and I what I said was truthful, but the second hardest thing that I went through was over this past year. I mean, I lost my grandmother, I lost my aunt, I lost two very important women in my life within the you know time span of about 9 months. Two people that I saw on a yearly basis aren't here anymore. And that was extremely hard to get through. And for a long time, I bottled those feelings up and I didn't allow myself to feel them. I mean, when my grandmother passed away last March, I was getting ready to go coach at collegiate nationals. And right after that, I was going to Croatia to present research. This was a week before I left for those trips. I was going to be gone for about 2 weeks. And a week before that, I get the call from my mom that one of the most important women in my life passed away. And I didn't allow myself to feel. I didn't allow myself to feel grief. I mean, I would stay in the lab. I would stay in my office at the lab until midnight, 1 a.m. and I distract myself with work. I think that's what a lot of young men and young women do nowadays. They distract themselves these feelings with work. And I would, walk down, I'd sit in my car and I'd just lose it for 15 minutes because that was the 30 seconds that I had with myself and with my own thoughts. I didn't allow myself to have that for a longer period of time than the time that it took to walk from my office to my car. And by the time that I was there, I was putting on music to distract me again, you know? And so I think that if you are going through something that's hard, one, understand that that's okay and that you're not alone in that path. And two, allow yourself to feel it. Know what that feels like. And then on the other side of things, when you are in a great period of life, when you are in a period of life where business is booming and you're having a fun time and you're around your friends and your family all the time, sit there and in your own feelings and thoughts, know what that feels like. Because much like in the whole yin and yang of strength and body, strength and mind, there's a yin and yang in this too, where you can understand in the feelings of sorrow and despair and whatever you want to talk about it, these kind of down thoughts that we have at ourselves. You can have, oh, I've felt this before, and I know what it feels like to not be here, right? Because I was able to sit down with my own feelings and thoughts in moments of happiness, moments of pride, moments of being up on myself. And on the other side of things, when you are in those moments of being up on yourself, being grateful for that and sitting down and saying, man, 3 months ago, I wasn't in this situation. Wow, this is awesome. Like, thank God that I was able to get through that. But what did I do that? Like, what did I do to get through that? You know? And so I think that it's essentially allowing yourself to feel, allowing yourself to actually have those feelings and knowing what they feel like. And then, much to what we talked about earlier, shifting your perspective and understanding that it's always going to happen. You're never going to just be great all the time. If that were the case, then we'd all be doing what we love to do every single day, which I think a lot of us are, but there's times and moments where that definitely isn't the case.
I don't know if you caught this, Rob. The podcast is not on video, so it's just audio. But I had this very quick, dumb smile come over my face because I thought, full circle, put a bow on it. We talked about me wanting to learn the piano.
Yeah.
It would be so hard to learn how to play the piano if I had noise canceling headphones on the whole time. And I
Yeah.
just refused to listen to the notes, the good ones and the bad ones. It would be so much easier, more efficient and effective to learn if I could hear what I was doing, just like it's so important for us to feel what we're feeling.
Mm-hmm. 100%.
Hmm. So if this episode, our conversation resonated with someone and they're like, I need more Rob in my life. I need that energy. I need that insight. I need him. Where should people find you? Where can they connect with you and learn more about what you got going on?
Yeah. So the easiest way to find me is obviously on social media. At Strength Rob is the handle. I post everything on there from telling people that they're not getting fat because of seed oils to specific programming strategies for powerlifting, right? So I love talking to people on there. Um, and so if you want to reach out to me and talk about any of these things, please do send me a DM, shoot me a message. If you just want to be a part of kind of the community that I'm trying to build, shoot me a follow. I've got a channel where I'm trying to really get like-minded people together there. And then if you're somebody that's sitting here thinking, okay, like I'm kind of interested in strength training and competing in powerlifting and stuff like that, if you go on our website, escalatetraining.net, you'll be able to see everything that we offer there and the inquiry form and everything to reach out to me to take the next steps towards getting on a platform and squatting, benching, and deadlifting as much as you motherfucking can, man. 'Cause that's what life's all about, brother.
That's it. That's what it's all about. And I second everything Rob said. If you need more of his energy in his life, go check out those places. I'll link them in the description. And Rob, I just appreciate you a ton, man. As a friend, as a fellow coach, as a fellow podcaster, as a human. Thank you for the energy you bring to this world and everything that you're doing. I'm really excited to watch it continue growing.
Thank you, man. And I'm gonna thank you as well because I don't think we ever actually talked about it. Joe's been coaching me for about a little over a year now,
Mhm.
about a year and a half. And I don't think that I would be able to have these realizations about a lot of the things that I talked about without the conversations that I've had with him. And I'm technically a business client for
Mhm.
Joe, but a lot of the calls that I have with him feel like mindset coaching calls. And I'm eternally grateful for you, man. I cannot thank you enough for one, just having me on to be able to talk about this stuff because I love talking about it. But two, being that bigger brother that I never had. I mean, I talk about it all the time, but it's truly how I feel about you, and it's awesome.
I wasn't expecting to cry on this recording, but I'm close. And seriously, man, I appreciate that. And I'll go on a quick tangent, but the business side and the mindset side, and it's just so all intertwined. And really, at the end of the day, I think growing a business is a lot about growing as a person. And at the end of the day, it is very simple, but it is far from easy. And you've done a great job, and you're so coachable. And it's really such a pleasure to watch you grow as a person and also as a coach and a business owner. And I have no doubt that sky's the limit. And just really appreciate you.
Thank you, man. Appreciate you too, brother.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Indoor Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.